The crane arm hit something at 40 feet down. Not bedrock, not a boulder, something hollow. The impact rang out like a church bell across an empty quarry, and every man on that site stopped working at the exact same moment. None of them were ready for what was on the other side of that steel door. None of them would be the same after they found it. Harlan Quarry had been silent for 27 years. The kind of silence that has texture thick with undergrowth, rusted chain link, a faded no trespassing sign that nobody had bothered to read in over a decade. The local kids called it the hole. The county called it a liability. The new owners called it an opportunity. Carl Dressler, the site manager, had seen plenty of old quarries come back to life. He was 51, built like a man who'd spent 3 decades outdoors and had the kind of unhurried confidence that comes from solving problems nobody else wanted to touch. He'd been brought in specifically for this job: clear the debris, expand the face by 120 feet, and get the site ready for extraction. Budget was tight. Schedule was tighter. The crew arrived at 5:40 a.m. on a Monday. 14 men, 2 excavators, a crane, and a compressor truck parked along the eastern ridge. By the end of day 2, they'd pulled out 40 tons of collapsed ceiling, broken timber, and old equipment. Spirits were high. Some of these guys hadn't had steady work in months. Then came day 3. It was just past 9 in the morning when the crane's digging arm punched into the rock face at 40 feet and made a sound nobody could explain. The operator, a quiet guy named Rusty, cut the engine without being asked. Everyone heard it. Carl climbed down from the ridge and crouched at the excavation face. He switched on his helmet light and pressed his palm flat against the exposed surface, and felt the faint vibration of hollow space behind it. "Manual from here," he said. "Everyone gloves up." It took 2 hours to clear enough material to see what they'd hit. What emerged from the rock face was a reinforced steel access hatch, circular, roughly 5 feet across, bolted into a poured concrete collar, the kind of thing you'd find on a pressure vessel, or a military bunker, or a very serious mine, the kind of thing that had been built to last and sealed from the outside. Carl studied the handle. No padlock, no warning markings. The steel was heavily oxidized but structurally intact. He looked at his crew. Nobody said a word. He turned the handle. It moved on the second pull with a groan that seemed to come from deep inside the earth. Cold air pushed out stale mineral, unmistakably underground. The chamber behind the hatch was small, maybe 3 feet deep, a transitional airlock, Carl realized. And on the far side, another door, already slightly ajar. Beyond it was a tunnel. The walls were cut clean. Old timber shoring still intact. The floor had been worn smooth not by water but by foot traffic. Someone had been walking this tunnel regularly for a very long time. Retention note. Pace slows here intentionally. The viewer's mind is asking, who built this, and what's down there? Let that tension breathe. Don't rush to the answer. 6 men followed Carl into the tunnel. The youngest, a 22-year-old named Marcus, who'd only been on the crew for 3 weeks, made it about 30 feet before he stopped and said, flatly, that he wasn't going further. Carl didn't argue. 3 others turned back with him. Fear underground isn't cowardice, it's often survival instinct. Carl had learned that decades ago. The 5 who remained moved slowly. The tunnel went deeper than expected, a gentle downward grade for what Carl later estimated was nearly 400 feet. Carved ventilation channels ran along the ceiling at regular intervals, a detail that struck him as significant. This wasn't a ruin, it was maintained. Then came the smell, wood smoke, faint but unmistakable. Then the sound, not a wail, not a ghost, a voice, low, tuneless, the kind of humming a person does when they're completely alone and not thinking about it. Carl raised a fist and his crew stopped. They stood in total silence in the dark tunnel, listening to someone hum what sounded like an old folk song, 50 yards ahead of them. Carl stepped forward. The tunnel opened into a chamber. It was roughly 40 feet across and lit by 4 oil lanterns hanging from iron hooks in the ceiling. The walls were carved with markings. Some of them looked like survey notations. Others like dates, others like words in a language nobody recognized. Mining tools, meticulously maintained, leaned in a wooden rack near the far wall. There were cots, made from old cart frames and folded canvas. A small iron stove vented up through a crack in the ceiling. A shelf lined with tin cans, neatly organized. And 8 men, sitting or standing, staring at the intruders with the wide, disoriented eyes of people who had not expected visitors and had stopped expecting them a very long time ago. The oldest of them stepped forward. His name was John. He was 73 years old. He'd gone underground at 46 during a routine deep excavation when a series of earthquakes, 3 in 40 minutes, an unusual sequence later confirmed in seismic records from the region, collapsed the primary shaft and 4 secondary tunnels above them. 8 men had been working the deep level. None of them made it out that day. Rescue crews had worked for 11 days before concluding that no viable pockets of air could have survived the collapse. The men were declared dead. Their families received death certificates. The quarry was sealed and eventually abandoned, but 8 of them had survived. They'd found the collapse had left them a sealed but breathable section of the lower system, with a deep natural spring, residual supplies, and critically the ventilation channels that the previous operators had, somewhat unusually cut all the way to the surface. Thin shafts, barely 2 inches across, but enough to breathe. Wired to a hand-cranked generator that one of the men had been maintaining every 3 days for over 2 decades. They had tried to dig out twice. The first attempt caused a partial secondary collapse. They stopped. They adapted. They built a life structured, disciplined, with routines designed to preserve both physical health and mental clarity. John described their daily schedule with quiet precision: exercise at dawn, maintenance from 7 to 9, a shared meal at noon, reading in the afternoon, journal writing before sleep. Each of them had filled multiple notebooks. 2 men had died underground, of natural causes. They were buried in a chamber off the East Passage, marked with hand-carved stones. John's voice didn't break when he told Carl this. It was a fact. He'd had years to make peace with it. We had decided, John said, that if no one ever came, we would simply live here until we couldn't, and we would do it with dignity. Carl contacted emergency services from the surface at 2:47 p.m. He kept his voice level on the call. He'd tell people later that he didn't cry until he got back underground and watched John, who had not seen natural light in 27 years, stop at the mouth of the tunnel and just stand there, face tilted up toward the pale winter sky, eyes closed, completely still, for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Carl timed it. He didn't know why he timed it. He just needed to do something with his hands. The 6 survivors were airlifted to the regional hospital, where they spent the next 3 weeks under observation. Their medical condition surprised the attending physicians: mild vitamin D deficiency, some joint deterioration, consistent with limited mobility, but no severe organ damage. Their discipline had kept them alive in ways that a more chaotic survival situation might not have. The reunions happened on different days, for different families in different ways. Some were as you'd imagine: tears, collapse, disbelief. Others were complicated. 27 years is a long time. Some families had moved on, remarried, built new lives around the certainty of a loss that turned out not to be permanent. Carl didn't watch those ones. He said those belonged to the families, not to the story.